This is Connie Browning. She's going to tell us about her life. Connie Stagg Browning. She'll start with as early as she can remember and work chronologically straight through.
Well, I was born in Evansville, Indiana, and I was born downtown. And we lived right across the street from the old Central High School. And my earliest memories are standing at the window and watching the students go to Central High School. And we moved to the east side when I was 3 years old. And the moving van was pulled by horses. It was Geiger moving. And I remember my brother Joe was about 10, and he was sitting up on the seat by the driver, and he got to ride out there. And I was so jealous. And I went out on the streetcar. My sister Mary took me out on the streetcar. And we moved on Adams Avenue. And I lived there until I was in high school.
What address on Adams Avenue?
1039.
Right by Kentucky Avenue, yes.
Yeah, it was a block from Kentucky Avenue. And the streetcar was just a block away. And I went to Boston Kindergarten. And then I went to Stanley Hall in the first grade. And then I had to go to a Catholic school, so they sent me down to Assumption, down by where the Civic Center is now. And they tore all that down. And anyway, at 7 years old, I went over and took the streetcar downtown, all by myself. And then I would be there all day. And we didn't have lunch rooms or anything at that time, cafeterias. And I had to go to a hamburger joint to eat my lunch. And my money was tied up in a handkerchief. And my streetcar fare was pinned to my sweater. And anyway, I went to Assumption through the 8th grade, and then I went to Memorial. And
at Assumption, did you have to go to church every day? And who was the priest there? And was that the cathedral?
We had a number of priests. Father Rives, Monsignor Rives was the head. And then we had Father Laugo, and we had Father Mattingly. And it seems that there was another priest there temporarily. And then they started the first, we had a nun. We were taught by the Sisters of Providence. And one of the nuns started a church for the black members. And that was in the auditorium. And they had an organ, and they had service every Sunday there. And I went there through the 8th grade, and then I went to Memorial.
And then the nuns taught you Memorial, and you walked to Memorial. You didn't take a streetcar. You still lived at 1000 block of Adams.
When I went to Memorial, I walked.
Yes. Tell us about when they had the circus and where the circus would let off people and where they would let. Tell us all about the circus.
The circus would unload down at the L&N station, which is no more, not there anymore, but it was a train station. And they would come down from the L&N down Adams Avenue, and they would come all the way Adams Avenue down to where Washington School is now. And that was the circus grounds. That was all land, no school. And they would come right by my house, and I could sit on my front porch and watch the elephants and the camels and all the horses and the wagons with the lions and tigers all come right by my house. And I went to every circus. I didn't miss a one because my brother-in-law, Bob Chaffin, loved circuses, and he took me to every circus and bought me everything.
And the circus at Washington Grade School now, that's about Weinbach and Washington, but that's out in the country at that time.
Yes, it was the country.
Then it moved to the Coliseum and then Robert Stadium. Did you ever go to the circus at the Coliseum?
Well, later on, they had the circus at the Coliseum, and I remember going there. I remember taking Bill and I took Diane, she was little, and we sat up in the balcony, and the circus was down on the floor. And then later on, when the children were older, we sat on the stage at the Coliseum and watched the circus.
That building's still there. It was built in the 1916, 1918. The first soldier of World War I was laid in state there, Gresham, in 1918, before you were born. First soldier killed in World War I.
I remember going to the Coliseum for a lot of things when I was little. They would have food shows and all sorts of events at the Coliseum because that was the only place we had. And it was quite nice.
Tell us what downtown Evansville was like at that time. Did you ever go shopping downtown or see the old courthouse or anything interesting downtown?
Well, downtown was a busy place. We had banks and we had a lot of stores. And Evansville was kind of a small town. Everybody knew everybody. When I went anywhere, I could go in a bank and the elevator operator knew who I was. I mean, it was that kind of town. I'd go in a bank and the teller knew me. You know, and I was just a child. They knew my family. People knew everybody. It was a small town.
Did you get a good education at Assumption and Memorial?
Assumption by the Sisters of Providence. Now, we lived in St. Benedict's Parish, but my mother didn't want me walking that distance. There weren't any houses there at that time. The houses weren't built until after the war. And I took the streetcar downtown.
Do you think the Sisters of Providence at both at Assumption and at Memorial were good teachers for you?
Say what?
Were the nuns good teachers for you at both places?
I had the Sisters of Providence at Assumption and Memorial.
Were they good teachers, you think?
Huh?
Were they good teachers?
Yes. My mother thought they were the better educated, and that's why she sent me downtown.
Now, can you tell us when your mother was born and when your father was born, where they were born and how long they lived and what they did for a living?
Well, my mother was born in Evansville on the west side, West Bank and Red Bank Road. And she was her mother and father. Her father came from Germany, and he was a cooper. And he also had a farm, a small farm. And my grandmother came from Bath, New York. And they had, I think, 7 children, and my mother was one of the younger ones. And her father died of smallpox when she was 7 years old. And she had smallpox. And then she got married to my father. My father was adopted. He came on the orphan train, and he was adopted by the Winkler family in Belleville, Illinois. And then when he was a young man, he came to Evansville and met my mother, and they were married at St. Boniface Church in May the 30th. And they were, he died of pneumonia when he was 53. And my mother was widowed for a long time. And I had brothers and sisters, and I was the youngest.
Now, your mother had to take care of your mother did a lot of things. She was widowed twice. Your mother widowed once.
Once.
Okay, widowed once. Okay.
She was widowed when she was 53.
I see.
And my brother Francis was 21 years older than I.
Yes.
And he was still at home. And I had 2 brothers, Charles and Joe. And my sisters were Loretta and Mary and Jeanette.
And tell us what happened to all your brothers and all your sisters.
Huh?
What happened to all your brothers and all your sisters?
They all passed away before I'm the last survivor.
Tell me what each one of them did in their life.
What?
What each one of them did in their life. What each one of your brothers and sisters did in their life.
I did. Well, my father had a grocery store and meat market. And after he died, my mother closed it and didn't run it.
Where was the meat market?
Huh?
Where was that?
It was on Gum Street. I think it was 6th and Gum, if I remember correctly. And but previously to that, when he was younger, he had a meat market and a livery station on Franklin, and I have a picture of it. And the building is still there. And then they moved downtown, and then they moved to the east side and built that house on Adams. And that's where I grew up.
Tell me about your oldest brother, and then go down on all your brothers. Tell me where they lived and what they did, and then your sisters, where they lived and what they did.
Well, my brother Francis, he promoted wrestling matches in Evansville. He was a promoter. And Charles and Joe, they first worked at the brewery when Prohibition was out, and then Charles moved to Florida, and he ran a trailer park and repair shop for trailers. And my brother Joe had a tavern here, Joe's Bar.
Where was that? Where was Joe's Bar?
Oh, on well, first it was at the Three Corners, wherever that was, and then it moved on. I can point out the building, but I can't tell you the street.
That's all right.
And he died of Parkinson's, and
then you got three sisters, and what happened to each one of your sisters?
well, Loretta was the oldest, and she had one child who was born on my 3rd birthday, and she worked as what they called a bookkeeper in those days, accounting, and she worked for Crookabar and Kahn, and then she worked for Peter Healy Browse, and she died. She was 94, I think, when she died.
What was her name?
Loretta Barber.
Okay.
And she had one son, and Ray Barber, and he's deceased. And he has one of his sons is an attorney here in Evansville, and I think the rest are out of town. And then let's see, Jeanette had 2 daughters, Carolyn and Betty, and Betty married Jim Reedford, and she has a number of grandchildren. And Carolyn never married, and she died not too long ago of cancer. And she lived in Tulsa. And Mary had one son, Terry, and she lived in New Orleans. Her husband was a city editor for the Times-Picayune in New Orleans, and she worked at Charity Hospital.
Charity was the biggest, one of the biggest hospitals in New Orleans, and she worked at the front desk there for many years.
She was in the accounting department, and she was the chief accountant. And it's hard to believe that building is empty.
Yeah. After the flood from Katrina, we lost the whole Charity Hospital.
Huh?
Lost the hospital with the Katrina flood in 2005, 6, or 7. Now, tell us about your occupations. Tell us about Goble and Fiberfill and what you did at each occupation after the war.
Well, I went to work for Shane Uniform Company, and then when the war started, I went to work at the shipyard. And after the war, I was working for Moore and Holman, the architect, and I quit that to stay home. Bill came back from service, and I stayed at home until I went to work at Goble Furniture. And I worked at Goble for about 11 years until they went bankrupt. They sold it to another person, and that person was bankrupt. And then
But Goble Furniture from what year to what year?
Huh?
What year to what year were you at Goble Furniture? About 1960 to 70?
No. I have to think about it. I went to Goble when Christine was 2 years old. What year was that?
60.
60? I went to work there.
60 till about 71, and that's located by the Old North High School, about Stringtown and Maxwell. Goble Furniture is about Stringtown and Maxwell.
They what?
We're located about Stringtown and Maxwell in Evansville.
They were on Garvin Street.
Garvin Street.
Next to, that, what's the name of that company?
A great big company called Chrysler.
Yeah.
By Chrysler, with Chrysler, and still building. It's called Escalade Sports now.
Yeah.
And one of your neighbors here worked with you there. He was a salesman there when you worked at Gable. He lives right over here in Summit 1, right
What's
next
his
to you. It's escaping my mind, but I'll tell you later. But he lives right here, and he worked with you for 11 years there.
Oh.
He was a salesman. You were a bookkeeper there, weren't you?
Yes. A billing department, and then after they sold it to some men who worked at Cargus, and they couldn't manage it, and they went bankrupt. And so then it came back to the Gobles, and then I had to stay there and close up the books and everything. And at that time, then I was registered as to look for a job, and they called me and said they had an opening at Fiberfill. They wanted me to go see about. Well, to me, Fiberfill was what you put in furniture, a fluffy thing. But I found out that Fiberfill made little tiny pellets of plastic, and those were extruded into products, like, for example, Duracell batteries. The case is made of our product there. And so I went to work there in the doing the payroll, and it was my first encounter with computers. I went there, and I had not seen anything like this before. The room was huge, and it had many, many machines in it. See, what you would first key punch, and then you would run these cards through, and then you would run them through a calculator, which was this big, huge thing. And so I learned to use this kind of computer. I mean, the printer was as big as a sofa. And so it was an experience. And then the small computers came, and I ordered one for my office. And then I converted everything to that. And we saved everything on floppies, and I could lock those up because everything I had was confidential. And so that's what I worked there. Oh, how long?
1971 to 85.
I think.
90.
90.
So about 20 years at Fiberfill with Charlie Kuhn. About 20 years at Fiberfill.
And then I retired when I was 70.
So, yeah, that'd be about 1990.
Yeah.
Back to your Goble Furniture, though, you said two people from Cargus went and bought it and then couldn't run it. But Cargus, Karges, is one of our biggest
Cargus
furniture factories.
Yeah.
So probably some people that thought they could run furniture went over to Gobles and helped out there and ran it for a while. But Cargus Furniture is internationally known. They just closed their shop here in about 2013, but they sold furniture internationally to very famous people.
Very, very, very good furniture.
Yeah.
Very fine furniture. And
you didn't sell any of that at Gobles, did you? None of Cargus furniture. Did you sell any Cargus furniture at Gobles?
no.
Yeah. Yeah.
We had a showroom in Chicago, and we would send our furniture up to Chicago every year to show it there, and we were nationally known. We had the furniture was very good.
Sorry, I'm jumping around, but back to Fiberfill. Fiberfill's a very big company in Evansville. It's been bought out by somebody else now.
Well, we were sold. When I worked at Fiberfill, then it was sold, and it was sold to Dart and Craft. And so some of my benefits come from Darton Craft.
Uh-huh.
And every time the company was sold, I had to write up a new pension plan and so forth. And it was really very interesting. Firstly, we were bought out by some of the officers, and it was called PS&T. And then we were bought by Darton Craft. And then eventually, I don't remember, then a Dutch company bought us. And they came over, and I remember we went to a meeting. The managers were called to a meeting. And as I went in the door, this Dutchman stopped me and he said, how do you feel being the only woman manager here? I said, no problem.
Mark, ask her about the Agoga wrestling matches.
There was a famous church downtown called Baptist Church, and behind the Baptist Church downtown was a gymnasium called the Agoga. And the Agoga, in the Agoga, that Baptist church had a guy who wore a red tie around town. He was a preacher. He had a red tie. He's a famous preacher in Evansville in the 30s, 40s, all the way to the 70s. But he'd go and have a breakfast at the Agoga Tabernacle or Agoga Gymnasium. Can you tell us a little bit about the Agoga?
Well, the Agoga Tabernacle was a kind of an auditorium, and that's where my brother held the wrestling matches. And so that's my recollection of Agoga.
It's a great big gymnasium. Memorial High School had all their basketball games there in the 60s, and the parochial schools had a lot of basketball games in the 60s, and even they made a gym about 1970, but in the 60s, Agoga was famous. It's torn down now.
Yeah.
It's near a Trinity Church downtown. It's about 2nd and Locust or something down there, or 3rd and Locust.
Yeah.
Real big and famous for Evansville. A lot of people went to Agoga.
Oh.
Now, what do you think Evansville's important for? You've spent your lifetime in Evansville. What is your top 3 memories of Evansville? What's important in Evansville? You've had all your kids here. You met your husband here.
Well, when Evansville, I remember it as a small town. I think the population was about 100,000, and everybody knew everybody. Yeah. And downtown was the place to be. And Friday night was open for shopping, and you would see everybody you knew downtown. And you could park on Main Street and window shop. My sisters loved to window shop, and we would look forward to all the new windows, especially in the fall. The DeYoungs had the prettiest windows ever. And as I say, Evansville was a small town, and you knew everybody. And I could ride my bicycle everywhere. And my friend Annabelle and I, and she's still my oldest and dearest friend, we went everywhere on our bicycles. And we just, every day we would go swimming at the Pleasure Park swimming pool on Maryland Street. And I would get up and go over to the U of E. They had clay tennis courts. And I would play tennis about 6 to 8, 9 in the morning. I'd go home and eat breakfast and get on my bicycle and ride across town and swim all afternoon.
Was that at Cooks Park at Maryland and St. Joe? That where you swam?
It was on Maryland Street, out by...
Helfrich Park?
Huh?
By Helfrich Park?
No, it's
Not
out.
that. Was it a swimming pool or was it a lake?
Huh?
Was it a lake or a swimming pool?
It was a swimming pool. Now, there was a salt lake. Now, I never swam at the salt lake, but they had a salt lake pool. And when they did Burnett Park, and they opened that lake, that dried up the salt pool, and that closed. And see, when Burnett Park was originally a lake, and it was salty. And we used to have a lot of fun there.
Can you tell us about the post office and then Acme Cigar Store that was next door, the Acme Hotel, the Vendome Hotel, and the Grind Building?
Grandfather Browning had the cigar store, and he was there from 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. And that was his life. And I have the receipt where he bought it, what he paid for it, and who he bought it from. And that was his whole life, and he was there all the time. And
across the street was the Grand Theater, and they didn't sell candy.
That was down the street.
Down the street.
Yeah.
They didn't sell candy. They'd come buy candy from him, and he made money.
Yeah.
Because they didn't sell candy at one time.
He sold candy and cigarettes and cigars, and he had card games in the back room. And he had a lot of business from the people that worked at the post office and the courier. And but that was his whole life, is a cigar store. He spent all his time there.
In a cigar store, then there was a barber shop between the cigar store and the hotel. There was a barber shop next to him.
Yeah, that was the Acme Hotel, and they had a barber shop there, and it was a small hotel, wasn't very big. We had the McCurdy and the Vendome at the time, and the Lincoln Hotel.
In World War II, there were a lot of hotels that they were filled at that time. The World War II filled those hotels, and Mr. Browning stayed open during World War II at the cigar store. Is that right?
He what?
He stayed open and made money during World War II?
World War II, yeah. And see, you had to stand in line to get cigarettes. You know, every time somebody said, "Oh, they're selling cigarettes," you got in line. The same thing for hosiery. You know, you had to get in line for it. Nylons, they had just come out.
They said after World War II, the lines are longest for hosiery than any other thing. Hosiery. The women loved hosiery, and they couldn't get it because it was rationed. Now, tell us about your experiences in the flood of 1937. What you did and where you were.
1937.
Flood.
Oh, yes, I was sick. We lived on Adams Avenue, and I had the flu. And I looked out my bedroom window, and I saw the water coming up through the manhole in the street. And I told my mother, and then we packed up a few things, and my brother, Francis, got us in his car, and he took the fence down at the back, in the backyard, and we had to drive out the alley. And we drove out the alley and went over by Aiken Park and went downtown. And we stayed at the Lincoln Hotel during the flood.
Where's the Lincoln Hotel? Where was that?
It was on Main Street. You've heard of the Blue Bar. Well, the Blue Bar was downstairs in the Lincoln Hotel. I never was there because I was too young.
The Washington Theater was only a block away from you, and the water got all the way to the top of Washington Theater, so it probably got in your house.
All of that. Our house was flooded up to the windowsills. And I can remember afterwards my brother shoveling the mud out of the house.
Did they clean the house up and use it, and it was usable?
Yeah, it's there being lived in today. And we, in those days you had a coal furnace in the basement. And of course, you just started a fire, and that dried out everything. And some people had warped floors, but our floors did not warp. But the water was, and of course, you had plaster. See, today with the walls, this would just disintegrate. But you had plaster walls, and the water was up to the windowsills, and I remember my mother crying so because she had a lot of her things in a trunk in the basement, her things that she liked to save, and that was all ruined in the flood. And our piano was ruined, all the furniture, and so forth. And
That was a cold time. It was, I think, January 30th through February 10th. The flood staged at 53 feet for 10 days.
In that drawer, I have a flood scrapbook with all the clippings in that drawer
Yeah.
that I made during,
Very cold weather then, too. Cold?
it was fairly mild.
I see.
Well, except that I remember going down to the river and the ice was stacked up on the edge of the river, and but of course you didn't have school, and Annabelle and I walked all over Evansville.
When there were several things that happened in your time, what did you think about the planes? I mean, to see the world so different during your lifetime, we have planes now that make everything different. What do you think about planes and spacecraft?
The first time I flew, I wore a hat and gloves. It was very, very nice, and flew to Chicago. And then I remember we got our first radio when I was 9 years old. And we got our first TV when Elizabeth was a baby. And it was so snowy, black and white, And then we got our first color TV when Diane was married. Those were dates I remember, And we lived there on Powell until Chris was in high school. And we moved out to Twickenham. And Bill loved it out there. We lived on the highest hill, and you could just see for miles then. But then everything grew up. All the trees grew up. And you remember when the plane crashed with the U of E people? Well, I was in my bedroom at the front of the house, and I heard this plane, and it sounded funny. And planes never came over our house. So I got up and looked out the window, and as I looked out the window, here came this plane over the house across the street from me. And it clipped trees. And I ran to the back window and I saw it go down. And I called to Bill. He was watching TV in the family room. I said, a plane just crashed. Oh, you're always imagining things. And I got my transistor radio and I could hear them down there at the site, trying to find a way to get in there. There was a gate they couldn't find to get in there. And Joe and Mary, John and Mary Jo Shimmick were some of the first priests down there. They lived up there on Nob Hill. And it was a terrible thing. And Elizabeth had just graduated from college, and she was working at the Wellborn Hospital. And she was out shopping, and she had a midget MG, and she was out at Lawndale, and she heard that, so she tried to get home. Well, they stopped her at the road, Lynch Road, and wouldn't let her go through. And when the man turned to help somebody else, she just gunned her motor and came on up. And but it was a terrible night. It really was,
You remember the smoke and the fire behind your house? Could you see
No.
You couldn't see them.
Didn't see any smoke or that.
Fire.
It's just that I knew that the plane went down, and I just saw it go down, but Bill didn't want to believe it.
What about train traffic? Tell us how you use trains and how you don't use trains now. And did your family use trains very much during your life?
Trains?
Yes.
Well, see, when Diane went to Marquette in Milwaukee, we went on the train, and she came home on the train for breaks, And I don't know, Robert, how about you when you went to Marquette?
No, I didn't go on a train.
You didn't?
But you took the train down to see Bill in.
What?
You took the train down to see Bill in North Carolina during the war.
Well, yeah, but that was way before that.
Tell us how many when you were growing up. Did you ever take the train, or did you take the train Tell us about the train, your experiences on
I
the
went to
train.
New Orleans. My sister lived in New Orleans, and I would go down to New Orleans on the train, and I would travel by myself on the train. And I remember coming home from New Orleans and going through the bayous, and it was such a wonderful sight at the evening sundown. And I'll always remember the sights of that. And yeah, I traveled by myself on the train.
And then the automobile, do you think the automobiles helped any of your children or grandchildren? Do you think the automobiles helped any of your children or grandchildren, or did it help you, the automobile?
Automobiles?
Yes.
Well, we always had one in my family. My brother Francis had one, and Charles and Jeanette and Loretta, they all had. My mother did not drive, and so she didn't, anytime I went anywhere when I was growing up, and I went to a party somewhere, I went in a cab. And we called a cab, and I went to the party in a cab and came home in a cab. Because, see, I went to Assumption, and my friends lived all over, not in my neighborhood. And so I would take a cab, and cabs cost 25 cents.
Can you just chronologically tell me your kids from what age and what they did? Your kids. Start with your kids, your oldest kid, and work your way down on your kids. What their names are, and when they were born, and what they do now.
Well, Diane is my firstborn, and she was born in 1944. And after that, then Bill was born in 46 after the war. And then Barbara, who died recently. And let's see, who else? Robert. And then John. And
Elizabeth.
Robert. No.
Elizabeth.
And Chris was the baby. She was the last. She was born on Good Friday.
And
I remember we dropped Bill off to serve at the Little Sisters and went to the hospital, and I had to, and she was born on Good Friday.
And tell us where each one of them live. Where do your kids live now?
Diane lives in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and Bill lives in Connecticut, and where he has a business. And let's see, Barbara has died, and she was an attorney, and she lived in Milwaukee, and her husband survives her. And then Robert, and he's a professor at Purdue and director of C-SPAN Archives. And John, he's retired for the Southwestern Indiana, and he works as a consultant, a senior consultant for mental health institutions. And Elizabeth, she worked for DuPont for many years and had her own company, and now she's retired, semi-retired. And Christine is an engineer. She graduated from Purdue, and she lives in Atlanta, and she's with Clorox Company. And I guess that's it, right? You're the last.
Yeah, Christine or Bob, do you have any things you could ask Aunt Connie that might add to? We're just trying to do her history a little bit. We're hitting the surface, but anything other thing you think of that we should ask her that would bring interesting things up?
What?
Well, you used to always go on the streetcar out to St. Joseph Cemetery.
Oh, well, see, my mother, of course, didn't drive. And we would go to the cemetery on Memorial Day, and she would take a basket of flowers and containers, and we would take the streetcar, and we would transfer downtown, and that streetcar would go out to what Mesker Park was called Oak Summit Park. And we would get off the streetcar up there at the top of the hill and walk all the way down to the graves. And that was, we did that until Jeanette got a car. And then in the middle of when you come in the cemetery, there's a statue there. But that used to be a pond. And my mother, who was scared to death of water, would say to Jeanette, "Be careful, you're going to back into that water." And every time I see it, I think, "Oh, we're going to back into the water."
Well,
And
didn't Bill and Charles get on the streetcars and pull the electric things down?
did they what?
Pull the electric things down on the streetcars?
No. But kids did do that.
Okay.
And they used to put money, like a penny on the streetcar tracks. So the streetcar would run over it. I don't know what the purpose of that was.
Was that the ENOV? The ENOV was a streetcar that went all the way to Hatfield and went many other places. It was very helpful to people, and Charles Browning Sr. took the streetcar on Belmead to his work every day.
Yeah.
But there's streetcars like in New Orleans. There's very few. There's streetcars in San Francisco, but in New Orleans. But that was a very good thing to have in Evansville. And then it went defunct with the buses and the cars. But you went on the ENOV to lots of places, did you not?
Huh?
The ENOV. It was called the ENOV. It was a streetcar that went not just to St. Joe, but it went other places, did it not?
Well, you see, when I was little, the streetcar turned around at Boise High School. That was the end of the Washington Avenue line. And then the Washington went all the way out to Fulton Avenue and then turned around. So the Washington to Fulton, you could, go. But if you wanted to go somewhere else, you transferred downtown and you got a transfer. And like Belmead, it was a Belmead line and a Walnut line. And let's see, and the West Side. And you could go anywhere on the streetcar practically within the city limits, And I would take the streetcar downtown, and it cost 7 cents, or you could get 4 tokens for a quarter. And I may still have a token or two here. And but I would take the streetcar to school, and then we didn't have cafeterias or anything. I had to go find a hamburger joint to eat my lunch. And in those days, you wouldn't think of turning your children loose. Today, they watch them so carefully. But when I went to school, it was different. And I still have 2 friends left from high school.
What are their names?
Mary Newbolles and Annabelle Hilprick.
Yeah.
And
You play cards with them, or you have played cards you played cards with them up till this last year.
well, yeah, we don't do that anymore. We can't get enough people. Your mother will call me and say, "Connie, we're going to play bridge Wednesday," and that's the last of it. We never can get enough people to play bridge, and it's
Ask
Tell
her,
about the concession stands at the wrestling matches.
Who made money at the concession stands at the wrestling matches at Agoga? How did
Yeah.
they make money?
sold hot dogs.
You did, or somebody else?
I helped. My brother Joe ran the concession stand, and we sold peanuts. Every week, they would deliver this thing of peanuts to the house in the shell, and my mother would sack them in little sacks. They sold it for a nickel. And we sold hot dogs and Cokes. There wasn't much variety on soft drinks. And, but that's what we sold at the concession stand.
Were the wrestling matches in the day or at night or on the weekend?
Night.
And was it crowded?
Oh, yeah. Very popular. Very popular. And, I don't know, it was just, I would take my homework and I would go in the office down there at the Agoga and finish my homework And sometimes Annabelle would come, and but I would help out at the concession stand. Mm-hmm. And
How old were you?
huh?
How old were you at that time?
About 11 or 12. I mean, see, Pleasure Park was on Maryland Street, and they would have they had a dance hall there, and they would have marathons where they danced till they weren't allowed to. They only had a break every so often, and so my brother had the concession stand, and he would work at night there, and then I would have to go out there and relieve him until my other brother came, and I was 11 years old, and they put me in a taxi cab and sent me out there, and I ran that concession stand. I ordered things, and I knew all the people on the dance floor. It was interesting.
The only time you didn't work in your life, you started working at probably 9 years of age, and you didn't work from 1944 to 1960, so 14 years. The rest of your life, you worked, did things all the time, right? You always had a job.
Yes, I always had a job.
Even as a kid, as a teenager, in high school, you had a job.
Huh?
In high school, you worked concessions.
Well, the family.
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't know. My family was always busy, and we did a lot.
How old were you when your father died?
My father died at 53, and I was 9 years old.
Yeah.
I don't remember much about him. I remember going to the grocery, and he would never let me have a Coca-Cola. I could have orange crush or grape soda, but Coca-Cola wasn't good for your stomach. He said you could take a piece of meat and pour Coke over it, and it just ruins it.
He's right. He was right.
Yeah, but now they changed Coke,
Yeah.
somewhere. They it was had some kind of drug in it, and it was addictive. And I don't know what year that was, but they did change it. You could research that.
What was your first memory of East Side Library?
Oh, I was in the first grade, and I went to the East Side Library. See, now I could walk from my house at the age of 5 and 6 and go anywhere, and I'd go over to the library, and I remember getting my card, and then I'd stop in the park on the way home and start reading.
Oh, your kids went to East Side Library. Every one of your kids went to East Side Library.
Bill used to take them every Saturday morning to get books. Remember that? Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
That's 2 blocks from your house.
It was 1, 2, 3, about 4 or 5 blocks.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. You'd go through the park.
Yes.
And, yeah, Miss Miller. Miss Miller was the librarian there for years. I don't know whatever happened to her. Do you remember her? Mm-hmm. One time when Robert and Chris were here, they went to the library. They wanted to look at the boxcar kids. What they read those books.
Yeah, I love those.
Yeah. And I remember taking Barbara, and she wanted a library card. They said, well, you have to be able to write your name. And she did at 4. And she got a library card. And, but see, I went to first grade at Stanley Hall, and they tore that down. And then I had to go to Assumption because I had to make my first communion in that way.
You lived on Chandler, and the Dipples bought your house on Chandler. Then you moved to Powell. But you lived on Chandler Avenue, and then you moved to Powell.
No. Oh, yes. Yeah. We lived in a Guthrie May house. They didn't build anything during the war, and you couldn't buy a house, and any new houses. And Guthrie May built all these houses, and Grandfather Browning said, that house is going to blow away.
So tell them about your first house after the war.
Well, that's what we're talking about.
No, on Garrison.
Oh, on Garrison. See, they didn't build during the war. And so Bill came back, and we were living with my mother, and then we were living with his parents. And I saw an ad in the paper where you could rent this house. And it said they wanted cash 3 months rent. And so I went out there, and Grandmother Browning went with me. And we got out there, and the yard was full of people. They wanted to rent that house because you couldn't. And they were all standing there, and I thought, well, why are they all standing here? So I just walked up to the door and knocked. And the man came to the door, and I got the house. I never have figured out why they all stood there.
And you got the house and rented it for 3 months.
3 months.
Then you moved into Chandler.
And then we bought the house on Chandler.
Yes.
And
But that house had coal.
had what?
Coal.
Coal. Mm-hmm. Oh, the house on
Garrison.
Garrison had a coal furnace, and also had, if you wanted hot water, the hot water heater, you had to put coal in that too. And and Bill was in New York taking training, and Aunt Mary Browning got worried about me being out there, so she took it upon herself to come out and live with me.
And she helped you out for a while.
Yeah, she came and lived there,
Yes.
and she liked it.
Where was Garrison? Downtown?
No, it's out by the, where the golf course is on out by on the Diamond.
Yeah.
It's right there.
By Helfrich, or
It's-
Fendrick Golf Course.
Not Hellfrick.
Fendrick.
Yeah, and it's called Willamette Village.
Is it still there? The
It's
house? Their house from Garrison Street
Still
still
there.
there? What was the address?
I don't know the address, but it's still there. I've seen it. And but it was I was way out there, and from my front windows I could see the trains
Yeah.
over on the past 41.
Yes,
You know,
on Diamond
I
and
could see
41.
the traffic on 41.
Yes.
And I would put Bill, I had a bassinet, I'd put him in that he was 6 months old, on the floor of the car, and I would put Diane in the front, the car seats hooked over the front, and it was just a canvas, no protection. And if you had the kind of car where it was, you had to fold the seat down to get in the back, whatever time you'd stop, that seat would go,
So you had a car then? You had an automobile?
huh?
You had an automobile then?
A car, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And that was after the war.
Yes.
Grandfather Browning knew somebody in the car business, and it was a used
Yes.
car. And I can remember when I got my first car with, what did you call it? Not freewheeling,
Standard shift.
no. Oh. Where you could,
Shift or brake.
the where you could,
Put the kids on the floorboard. You put Bill on the floorboard and Diane up on the seat.
huh?
But the first car was a Chrysler.
Yeah. It was a Chrysler, and it had, it was so much different because it had this, you could, I can't think what it was called. Anyway, it was something new.
Yes.
And John used to ride, he used to, in the back, there was between the seats was a thing that came down for armrest, and he used to ride on that. He said that was his horse. And so we didn't have seat belts.
Yes.
And then when I got my first car with a seat belt, I had drove that to work. And then when I got ready to leave, it wouldn't start. And finally I called Bill, and he said, "Oh, you have to buckle the seatbelt before it starts." No one told me that.
Yeah.
So, but the first car I drove was a Model T, and I could only drive it up the driveway. It belonged to my brother who was in high school. He went to Boise, and he had this Model T, and he would let me drive it up the driveway when he came home. And then the next car I drove was a Model A Ford, and after that, I guess it was an old Dodge, and so anyway, now I can't drive at all, so I think I could, but you know, if I would hurt somebody, I would feel badly, and but when you can't drive, you're really have to sit at home all the time.
Well, you sure had a good life. How old are you now, Aunt Connie?
Well,
How old are you?
huh?
How old are you?
94.
Look at that. You're clear as a whistle. Isn't that something?
Huh?
You're good. You're clear as a whistle at 94.
Yeah.
You ought to be proud of yourself. Had some good family, good years, and a good life here.
Well, the doctor says it pays to have good genes. And but there's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah.
My heart's good, and you know, I don't have any aches or pains. I don't have arthritis. I don't have anything apparently wrong.
It's all our body parts, original body parts.
What?
You got all original body part. You got all original body parts. There's
Yeah,
no.
that's what they ask. That is so funny. You go to the, you have all your original body parts. I think that is so funny.
And no pacer. You don't have a pacer? No pacer? Nothing. You're all automatic, aren't you? You're just all, everything's yourself.
My heart's good,
Huh.
and sometimes I think you're better off if you don't know what's going on.
Okay, well, thank you for all this time on Christmas Day, 2015. Thanks, Aunt Connie and
I would hate
Chris
to
and
look at
Rob.
that.
You're doing all